Imagine a world of flickering torches, whispered betrayals, and kingdoms teetering on the edge of collapse. The medieval thriller, once drenched in mud, blood, and forbidden secrets, wasn't just about swords, but about survival. Many of these cinematic marvels vanished into the shadows of history, but what if the most shocking stories of all were the ones the world forgot? Let's rediscover them. Number 15. Flesh, Blood, 1985. When Paul Verhoeven's Flesh Plus Blood hit theaters, it wasn't hailed as a historical epic, it was condemned as an outrage. Critics called it too dirty, too cynical, and too real. Set in the plague-ridden 1950s Europe of mercenaries and moral collapse, it told the story of a rogue band of soldiers who kidnap a noble woman, igniting a brutal power struggle. Verhoeven, known later for RoboCop and Basic Instinct, wanted to strip away Hollywood's romanticized view of chivalry. The result? A medieval world without heroes, just desperate people clawing for survival. But here's the twist. Audiences weren't ready. The film was attacked for its unapologetic violence and moral ambiguity. Some countries even banned it temporarily, claiming it defiled the noble image of medieval Europe. Behind the scenes, the production was chaos. Verhoeven clashed with MGM executives, Rutger Hauer nearly walked off set, and the film's on-location shoot in Spain spiraled into feuds and injuries. But what emerged was something extraordinary, a medieval fever dream soaked in realism, far ahead of its time. Today, Flesh Plus Blood stands as a cult classic, gritty, daring, and unflinchingly human. It dared to show that the Middle Ages weren't golden. They were rotten to the core. And maybe that's why it still haunts anyone who dares to look back. Number 14. The Name of the Rose, 1986. Sean Connery's The Name of the Rose didn't just bring Umberto Eco's labyrinthine novel to life, it resurrected the very idea of the medieval thriller. Set in a remote Italian monastery in the year 1327, the film follows a Franciscan monk investigating a string of mysterious deaths among the monks. But the true horror isn't the killer, it's knowledge itself. Upon release, critics were split. Some praised its atmosphere and intellect, others accused it of being too dense for mainstream audiences. The Vatican reportedly disliked its depiction of religious hypocrisy. In several Catholic-majority regions, screenings were pulled after protests claimed it insulted sacred traditions. Yet audiences couldn't look away. The dark corridors, candlelit libraries, and muttered Latin chants created an almost supernatural realism. Behind the camera, director Jean-Jacques Annaud fought constant production battles. The elaborate monastery set, built from scratch in a German quarry, was destroyed and rebuilt multiple times due to weather. Connery, meanwhile, clashed with producers who doubted his post-James Bond appeal. The irony? His subtle, weary performance won him a BAFTA and revived his career. The Name of the Rose endures because it made intellect dangerous. It whispered a terrifying idea that truth itself can kill. And even now, it feels like a warning from history that we still haven't heeded. Number 13. The Reckoning, 1994. Long before medieval thrillers were fashionable again, The Reckoning offered a raw, spiritual mystery that most audiences missed. Paul McGuigan's dark gem follows a disgraced priest who joins a troupe of traveling actors in the 14th century. When they perform a play about a recent murder, they uncover a conspiracy far larger and far deadlier than they imagined. Upon release, it sank quietly at the box office. Viewers expected a period drama and got a slow-burning psychological thriller. Critics called it bleak, uncommercial, and too morally complex. But that's what made it extraordinary. The film explored how guilt, corruption, and faith intersect under the shadow of death. The controversy was immediate. Religious organizations denounced its depiction of clerical corruption. In some European regions, screenings were limited after complaints from local clergy. Yet, ironically, historians praised it for its authenticity. Its muddy realism, its smoke-filled towns, and its weary peasants who looked like they'd never known sunlight. Behind the scenes, the film struggled with budget cuts and poor distribution. Yet its haunting score, gritty cinematography, and Paul Bettany's anguished performance turned it into something quietly timeless. The reckoning was buried by indifference, not scandal. But today, it feels like prophecy, a whisper from a forgotten age reminding us that sin and salvation often share the same stage. Number 12. Anchorus, 1993. Few medieval films dared to go as quietly mad as Anchorus, a haunting British drama directed by Chris Newby. Inspired by the real-life story of a 14th-century holy woman who voluntarily sealed herself inside a church cell, the film feels less like a narrative and more like a fever dream. Shot in stark black and white, it explores religious obsession, female repression, and the dangerous hunger for spiritual purity. When it premiered, audiences didn't know what to make of it. Critics called it mesmerizing but inaccessible. Religious commentators accused it of mocking faith. But what unnerved people most was its tone. Cold, ritualistic, suffocating. You could almost feel the damp stone walls closing in. The film questioned whether holiness was divine or just another form of control. Behind the scenes, Newby shot the film on a shoestring budget, using minimalist lighting and long, hypnotic takes to create an almost medieval texture. The lead actress, Natalie Morse, spent weeks researching medieval mysticism and fasting practices to inhabit her character's trance-like state. The result was hauntingly authentic and deeply unsettling. Anchorus never got a wide release, and for decades it lived on only in dusty festival reels. Yet, for those who discover it today, it feels like an exorcism captured on film, a reminder that fanaticism often hides behind sanctity. Some prisons, it suggests, are built not of stone, but of belief. Number 11. The Advocate, 1993. The Advocate, also known as The Hour of the Pig, was so controversial that distributors tried to hide it behind multiple titles. Directed by Leslie Megahay, this grim and darkly witty thriller follows a lawyer in 15th century France who defends animals put on trial for crimes. Yes, you heard that right. Pigs, goats, and even roosters were once executed by church decree. The film was intended as a biting satire of medieval superstition and institutional hypocrisy. But censors didn't find it funny. Several European territories delayed or restricted its release, citing its anti-religious tone and moral ambiguity. In the United States, some theaters refused to screen it entirely after pressure from conservative groups. Behind the camera, the production teetered between art house and controversy. Colin Firth, playing the young lawyer, delivers a performance of moral conflict, trying to bring reason to a world ruled by ignorance. Director Megahay clashed with financiers who wanted more courtroom, less theology. But the director held his ground, crafting a film that felt like Kafka set in the Middle Ages. The film disappeared after a brief run, but later found revival among historians and cinephiles. They saw it for what it was, a sly, chilling commentary on blind faith and the cruelty of reason twisted by power. In the end, The Advocate reminds us, truth may defend the innocent, but in dark ages, even innocence can hang. Number 10. Markéta Lazarova, 1967. Before the term cinematic masterpiece was thrown around so freely, František Vláčil's Markéta Lazarova defined it. A sprawling Czech epic set in the brutal winter of the 13th century, it tells the story of a noblewoman kidnapped amid a war between pagan clans and a Christian king. The result was less a film and more a medieval hallucination, mud, frost, faith, and madness blending into one hypnotic storm. When it premiered in Czechoslovakia, it was hailed as the greatest Czech film ever made. But the government had mixed feelings. Its portrayal of spiritual chaos clashed with official narratives about order and progress. Internationally, it barely circulated. Too bleak, too strange, too uncompromising. Western distributors passed, labeling it unmarketable. Production was nightmarish. Shot over 3 years in brutal cold, actors often worked without full scripts. Horses froze in the snow. Crew members suffered frostbite. Vláčil himself spiraled into alcoholism from exhaustion. but every frame looked like it had been painted by a medieval monk. The film was raw, poetic, and biblical in its intensity. For decades, Marketa Lazarova was a ghost, a legend whispered among filmmakers. But since its 4K restoration, it's been rediscovered by a new generation, stunned by its sheer visual power. It's not just a film, it's a relic of human endurance, proof that beauty and brutality can share the same breath. Number 9. The Navigator, A Medieval Odyssey, 1988. From the misty hills of New Zealand came one of cinema's strangest medieval thrillers, The Navigator, A Medieval Odyssey. Directed by Vincent Ward, the film begins in a plague-stricken English village of the 14th century. As death closes in, a group of miners dig a tunnel in hopes of reaching salvation. But instead of heaven, they emerge in modern-day New Zealand. Audiences in the late 80s didn't know what to make of it. Was it fantasy, time travel, or religious allegory? Critics were divided. Some called it visionary, others bewildering. Religious groups bristled at its portrayal of divine intervention as ambiguous and human-centered. Yet beneath the mystery lay a profound meditation on faith, hope, and collective survival. Production was notoriously challenging. Ward insisted on authenticity down to the mud. The actors lived in primitive conditions, eating only food that could have existed in the 14th century. The film's lighting relied heavily on natural torches and moonlight, giving it a spectral, dreamlike quality. Distributors struggled to market it, calling it too smart for fantasy audiences, too strange for drama lovers. In the years that followed, The Navigator became a cult treasure, a film whispered about in film schools for its bold mixture of medieval dread and modern existentialism. It reminds us that faith isn't about finding the future. It's about surviving the darkness long enough to imagine one. Number 8. The Seventh Seal, 1957. Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal is often remembered as a high art masterpiece, but we forget how scandalous it once was. In the conservative 50s, showing a knight playing chess with death itself was considered blasphemous. The film followed a crusader returning to a plague-torn Sweden, questioning the silence of God as the world crumbled around him. At release, it shocked both audiences and clergy. Religious leaders accused Bergman of nihilism. Critics feared it would corrupt faith through despair. Several countries, including Spain under Franco, restricted or censored the film for its religious provocation. Yet for every accusation, another viewer called it genius. Behind the camera, Bergman worked under relentless pressure from Sweden's strict film censors, who demanded softer theological tones. He refused. Max von Sydow's haunting performance as the knight became legendary, but the production nearly bankrupted Bergman's studio, Svensk Film Industry. And yet, The Seventh Seal endures like scripture for the soul. It's not just a film about dying, it's about looking death in the eye and asking why we live at all. Every time the knight moves his piece, it feels like humanity itself daring the unknown, hoping that faith might still win the game. Number 7. Flesh of My Flesh, 1974. This little-known French-Italian co-production was one of the most disturbing medieval thrillers ever made and nearly vanished forever. Flesh of My Flesh follows a wandering monk who becomes obsessed with a saintly relic that's rumored to grant divine visions. But the visions turn violent, unraveling his sanity as he's drawn into heresy, murder, and plague-era hysteria. When it premiered in Paris, audiences were stunned. Critics labeled it a film possessed. Religious leaders called for its ban, arguing it desecrated sainthood. French television refused to air it for decades. Rumors spread that reels were destroyed under government pressure, a myth that only deepened its legend. Behind the scenes, director Philippe Joubert faced persecution for his unorthodox style. Shot entirely in candlelight using medieval churches and ruins, the film had almost no dialogue, just whispers, bells, and chants. The haunting soundscape drove audiences to unease, blurring reality and faith. The film disappeared after limited screenings, but a single restored print resurfaced in 1999 at the Venice Film Festival, where critics finally hailed it as a forgotten masterpiece, a cross between Bergman and Tarkovsky. Flesh of my flesh lingers like a prayer left unanswered, proof that madness and devotion are often one breath apart. Number 6. The Hunchback, 1997. Long before dark medieval realism became fashionable, The Hunchback brought the Gothic nightmare to television screens with startling sincerity. Directed by Peter Medak and starring Mandy Patinkin as Quasimodo and Salma Hayek as Esmeralda, this adaptation of Victor Hugo's novel reimagined medieval Paris not as a fairy tale backdrop, but as a living, breathing purgatory. When it premiered, critics were divided. Some praised its visual authenticity and raw emotional tone. Others dismissed it as too bleak for primetime audiences. Yet, beneath the lavish costumes and cathedrals, The Hunchback was really a medieval thriller about obsession, persecution, and faith twisted into fanaticism. Frollo's descent into madness wasn't just villainy. It was a portrait of moral decay dressed in robes of virtue. Behind the scenes, production nearly collapsed under budget overruns. Medak insisted on shooting in real European cathedrals, battling bitter winter weather and a restless cast. Patinkin reportedly lived like a monk during filming, isolated, fasting, and sleeping in cloisters to feel Quasimodo's loneliness. Studio executives feared it would flop, but when it finally aired, audiences were captivated by its candlelit atmosphere and psychological depth. The Hunchback didn't spark sequels or fanfare, but its influence seeped quietly into later medieval cinema, laying the groundwork for the gritty realism of films like Kingdom of Heaven and The Pillars of the Earth. It's a forgotten epic that dared to ask, who is truly deformed, the outcast or the society that casts him out? Number 5. The Warlord, 1965. Before the world associated Charlton Heston with biblical heroes, he gave one of his darkest performances in The Warlord, a medieval thriller steeped in lust, loyalty, and lawlessness. Set in 11th century Normandy, it tells of a knight torn between duty to his feudal lord and forbidden love for a village woman. But beneath the armor lies something far more primal, a man caught between civilization and chaos. When The Warlord hit theaters, it was praised for its realism, yet condemned for its moral ambiguity. Gone were shining knights and fair maidens. Here, medieval life was filthy, cruel, and uncertain. Critics called it too grim for mainstream audiences. Some European countries restricted screenings due to its stark portrayal of feudal oppression and unflattering depiction of religious authority. Production itself was a battle. Director Franklin J. Schaffner insisted on historical accuracy, importing armor and weapons crafted from genuine medieval designs. Heston, famous for heroic grandeur, had to portray fragility, a warrior haunted by conscience. The shoot in Brittany, France was brutal. Crew members endured freezing rain, real mud, and collapsing sets. Over time, The Warlord became a touchstone for later historical dramas that rejected romanticism. It inspired Ridley Scott's unflinching portrayal of medieval brutality decades later. Today, the film stands as a grim mirror, reminding us that beneath the banners and oaths, the medieval world was built on fear and the hunger to control it. Number 4. Ladyhawke, 1985. At first glance, Ladyhawke looked like a fantasy romance. But beneath its sweeping score and moonlit castles lay one of the strangest and most tragic medieval thrillers ever made. Directed by Richard Donner, it follows two cursed lovers, Etienne and Isabeau, who can never be together. By day he becomes a wolf, by night she becomes a hawk. It's a tale of devotion under divine punishment drenched in Gothic mystery. Upon release, audiences were split. Some were enchanted, others were baffled by its mix of myth, theology, and modern synth music. Religious critics in Europe called it heretical, claiming its central curse mocked divine authority. Italian censors debated banning it for blasphemous symbolism. Yet for many, that very strangeness gave it power. It was both romantic and terrifying, celestial and tragic. Production was a storm of ambition. Donner filmed across crumbling Italian fortresses and the Alps, enduring torrential rains and near-fatal stunts with live hawks. Rutger Hauer clashed with producers over the film's tone, while Michelle Pfeiffer's ethereal performance turned her into an icon of supernatural beauty. Despite early box office disappointment, Lady Hawk refused to die. Over the years, it found a second life, embraced by those who saw its melancholy and defiance as something sacred. It endures as a reminder that love, like faith, can be both salvation and curse. And in a world divided by superstition, few films dared to soar so fearlessly between heaven and damnation. Number 3. The Passion of Joan of Arc, 1928. Few medieval thrillers in history have burned so brightly or suffered so cruelly as The Passion of Joan of Arc. Directed by Carl Theodor Dreyer, this silent masterpiece doesn't just recount Joan's trial, it locks the viewer inside it. Every frame feels like divine judgment rendered in close-up. Upon release, the film was instantly condemned. French nationalists accused Dreyer, a Dane, of blasphemy. The Catholic Church called it heretical, and censors banned it in multiple countries, demanding entire sequences be cut. Even in France, the government forced alternate edits, and then disaster struck. The original negative was destroyed in a studio fire, and Dreyer's vision was believed lost forever. Behind the scenes, the production was as punishing as its subject. Dreyer demanded authenticity down to the smallest gesture. Actress Renée Jean Falconetti, playing Joan, endured hours of kneeling on concrete for real tears. The minimalist set, white, vast, and almost surreal, made the story feel like it was happening outside of time. Decades later, a full copy was miraculously found in a Norwegian asylum in 1981. Re-released with its original cut, audiences finally saw what Dreyer intended, a raw, transcendent exploration of faith, madness, and persecution. The Passion of Joan of Arc remains one of cinema's purest expressions of martyrdom, a film so powerful that it transcends language, history, and even religion itself. It's not just medieval, it's eternal. A story that still dares to ask, when belief meets power, which one burns first? Number 2. The Return of Martin Guerre, 1982. Based on a true 16th-century mystery that haunted French folklore, The Return of Martin Guerre is both a love story and a psychological thriller, set in a time when truth was as dangerous as heresy. Gérard Depardieu stars as a peasant who returns home after years of war. But something feels off. Is he really Martin or an imposter? The film was hailed as revolutionary for its historical realism, yet it also sparked outrage. Historians attacked its anti-clerical tone, while conservative critics bristled at its feminist subtext. Religious leaders accused it of undermining faith by suggesting that identity, like truth, could be forged. Some rural French cinemas even refused to show it, calling it a threat to tradition. Director Daniel Vigne's attention to period detail bordered on obsessive. The costumes were handmade from authentic materials. Every prop, from plow handles to parchment, came from antique sources. The cinematography captured the dusty, suffocating texture of peasant life with a painter's eye. Audiences were mesmerized. The film earned global acclaim and even inspired Hollywood's remake, Summersby. Yet Vigne's version remains unmatched. Too quiet, too tragic, too real. The Return of Martin Guerre endures not just as a mystery of mistaken identity, but as a parable about faith itself, the need to believe in something, even when the truth is too frightening to face. In every age, it seems, we keep pretending to know who's behind the mask. Number 1. The Wicker Man, 1973. Few films blend medieval dread with modern paranoia like The Wicker Man. Though technically set in the 20th century, its soul belongs to the Dark Ages, where superstition ruled, sacrifice was sacred, and faith was weaponized. When it premiered, audiences were stunned. Edward Woodward played a devout Christian policeman investigating a girl's disappearance on a remote Scottish island only to find a pagan cult thriving in secrecy. What began as a crime story unfolded into ritual horror and a shocking ending that seared itself into cinematic legend. The controversy was immediate. British censors demanded cuts for its religious indecency. The U.S. version was butchered by nearly 20 minutes and some reels were lost entirely. Religious groups condemned it as satanic propaganda. The film's distributor even buried it under a rural release to avoid scandal. Yet it refused to die. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. Director Robin Hardy clashed with producers who wanted a conventional thriller. Christopher Lee, who played the enigmatic Lord Summerisle, financed his own promotion when the studio abandoned the film. Decades later, Lee would call it his favorite role. The best thing I ever did. Today, The Wicker Man is revered not just as a folk horror masterpiece, but as a medieval parable reborn, where ritual, religion, and reason collide in fire. It's a story about the oldest human fear, that faith in the wrong hands becomes the perfect weapon. Across these forgotten medieval thrillers, one truth echoes through time. Belief is a blade that can both save and destroy. These films dared to unmask the darkness beneath the crown, the robe, and the altar. Which one still chills you the most? Let us know in the comments, and remember, some stories were never meant to stay buried. Like and subscribe for more rediscoveries.